With training camp right around the corner, fun fact, the Bengals have the fewest roster players of any team in the NFL. Will they make a move? Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm Jake Bliscoe. He is James Rapine. We are your hosts of the Locked On Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. You can find this show on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcast. So if you want to be up to date on all things Bengals with the best one-stop shop for news and analysis you'll find as training camp gets going in just a couple of weeks, well, you're in the right place. And shout out to all the everydayers and all of you out there who make us your first listen. Appreciate all of you who have made us part of your routine in one way or another. And speaking of routine, one regular episode on this podcast, James, is a mailbag. And we are going to embark on that exercise today with some themed questions. We often find that no matter when we do a mailbag, we get questions that tend to cluster around similar topics. And today we're going to start with this question of a potential veteran addition or two. I opened the show, James, by saying that the Bengals have the fewest roster players in the NFL at 87. They're one of 5 teams in the NFL to have less than 90 players on their roster, and the only one at 87. So along those lines, we have a couple of questions in the mailbag about depth and acquisitions. The first comes from Bengelman Brothers, who asks, ranked in order of likelihood, which room should we expect a veteran addition before the end of camp? Running back, interior, offensive line, defensive tackle, and corner. And along those same lines, Bryson Miracle wants to know about running back specifically. What running backs could the Bengals potentially pursue? Because he thinks there's a spot in that room waiting to be filled.
Full disclosure, this is being recorded early Thursday afternoon. So if they do make a move, we will certainly have it covered. But I give that disclaimer because I do think they're going to make a move. And it might not be the players we name, but why in the world would you go to camp with 87? Why wouldn't you add the extra 3? I think it makes sense. I think they will. And so there's that. And we are less than, so Monday will be a week away from Mock Turtle Soup. July 22nd, we're that close to basically the start of things. Camp starts 2 days later. Veterans report on the 23rd of July. So we are really, really close. And as far as running back, I do think that is the most likely scenario of them adding a veteran in one of these spots. And part of it is because they haven't really addressed it. In the draft, they haven't addressed it with young guys. They brought in Zach Moss, who comes in and doesn't replace Joe Mixon, but is that veteran that can help stabilize that room alongside Chase Brown. You re-sign Travion Williams. I think you know what you have there. Chris Evans in the final year of his rookie deal. I think that's the spot that you could easily see a veteran, Jerick McKinnon, someone who they reportedly had interest in last year. He's still out there. You have a guy in Leonard Fournette desperate to get back in the league. I don't think the Bengals would be interested, but you never know. Dalvin Cook is someone who said he wanted to be in camp this year and wants to show that he still has something left in the tank. Would one of those guys take the minimum or around it? I do wonder that. The reason I don't think it's defensive tackle or cornerback, because you could argue that those are bigger needs, no doubt about it. But they have rookies there. They have guys that they like at those positions. They went out and they got Josh Newton, who they were impressed with. And I think that what we saw last year with DJ Ivey, they're willing to take a day 3 corner and then see how they are and see how they develop and how comfortable and how quickly they can get up to speed at the NFL level. And then at defensive tackle, you want to play your rookies. I think that's their logic. They want McKinley Jackson to be out there. They want Chris Jenkins to be out there. And so could they add a DT? I'm sure they could. I wouldn't put that high on their priority list. Same thing with corner. I could see them adding one, but I don't think it's as high as running back, where and maybe you disagree, but I think they're too deep And then after that, it's a bunch of question marks, or we know what they are, and what they are is probably not someone that can give you 10 to 15 carries a game on a weekly basis if you need it.
Yeah, when you look at where we're comfortable with depth versus where we think they're comfortable with depth, that's certainly a big part of this equation when we're trying to forecast what they will do. You mentioned that they've added in the draft at a couple of these positions. They add 2 defensive tackles, they add a corner, and they move Dax Hill into the cornerback room. They drafted in the last couple of years second round corners. They like where DJ Ivy is after a rookie year where he ended with injury, but as a 7th round pick, they think that there's a player there potentially if he's recovered well. So I can totally see the argument with, Alan George and Mike Hilton rounding out that room, Jalen Davis rounding out that room, where they're like, we're pretty happy with our depth at corner. We have some guys that are young veterans that have been around for a few years. My personal feelings are I would feel better if there was an Eli Apple level player in that room, a veteran that kind of a baseline starter as a depth piece. Last year, this move was Sidney Jones that didn't really have the same impact that Eli Apple did, where Eli Apple played a lot of games and a lot of big snaps for this team in a couple of playoff runs, but they don't really have that player right now. They have a really good starter in the slot in Mike Hilton. They have a good starter in Cam Taylor-Britt. And then there's a bunch of questions beyond that, but they have so many guys that they've added in recent years with premium picks or mid-level picks. That's one where it's kind of hard to see them making a move, even though I might want them to make a move. The defensive tackle, they draft 2 guys with premium picks, 2nd and 3rd round picks. They, of course, have BJ Hill, Sheldon Rankins to start in that room. But there's no 5th guy that I'm very comfortable with. And this is where I would personally want to make that move. Like, my personal best case scenario is one of these fringe roster guy steps up and forces his way onto the team and pushes or pushes Zach Carter into improved play, but like Travis Bell or something, like winning a roster spot and surprising in a good way is one of my best case scenarios for training camp at that position. Like, I'm looking for something else there, which is why I would like them to make a move there. But to your point, if they feel like they've got a 3rd round pick from a couple of years ago and a 2nd and 3rd round pick from this year, are they really anxious to add a player at that spot? Perhaps not, because they've invested resources there. They have not invested so many resources in running back, where they've gotten cheaper at starter, quote unquote starter, in Zach Moss, where they have a guy who was drafted last year and is primed for a bigger role in Chase Brown. Running back certainly looks like a spot where they could add a guy, but I keep coming back to the interior offensive line, where I just feel like there's no depth to speak of at that position, unless you think Trent Brown is a guy that's going to kick inside. And I know we've got a question about Trent Brown potentially playing guard that we're going to get to in a little bit here, but the depth behind the starters is some combination of Jackson Carman, Cody Ford, Trey Hill, Jackson Kirkland, Matt Lee, Nate Gilliam, Deontay Smith. Matt Lee doesn't really have position flex. Trey Hill, in all of his years with the team, has never really earned the trust of this coaching staff. They really like Cody Ford, and maybe that's the one guy that you can write in pen as the 6th lineman or 7th lineman because they drafted Amarius Mims this year. But I'm looking for another piece that I feel good about to back up that interior offensive line, a backup center with position flex. Right now, that looks like Trey Hill, but I'm not very confident in that, and I'm not sure that they are either based on his track record with the team. So that's a spot that I would look at hard for a potential acquisition as well.
I think a lot of people agree with you, and it's good because I have a response when it comes to guard and center, but I will get to it, and then we'll get to more of your questions coming up next. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit. Only available to U.S. customers.
Tell me
Jake,
what you think about this
yeah,
interior offensive line situation.
I think it ties to defensive tackle, cornerback, and even running back to a degree. Did they invest draft capital? Well, yeah, with Matt Lee. But I think they're high on Cody Ford, like you mentioned. They obviously used Amarius Mims and used their first rounder on him, and they're really high, I think, on their tackle room as a whole. But the other element here in the dark horse and the guy that I would just keep an eye on, I think they like Jackson Kirkland. I think that's a guy that could be one of those camp guys that shines. Maybe not, and we'll get into the camp stuff. But I think he's impressed some of his teammates. I think he's someone that the Bengals think they can develop into a quality, at least quality backup lineman. And so that if you look at it from that perspective, if they are confident in Ford, they like that Matt Lee is here to push Trey Hill and potentially take Trey Hill's job. And then they like a guy like Jackson Kirkland. Well, now we are talking about the eighth lineman or the ninth lineman. And so it's easier to see the vision. At the same time, this is the same team that we've seen.
Yeah.
When they've lost in the playoffs, the offensive line has been a big reason why. And whether it's injury, whether it's depth, all of those things, I'm not going to debate you. So if they sign someone as this show's going up, all day, I'm all for it. And I think everyone watching and listening is too. I also think that they're higher on Jackson Kirkland than some would say. I think that you're right about Cody Ford. Obviously, they have Amarius Mims. And I do wonder about the Trent Brown scenario, but we can get to that when the question comes up.
Yeah, maybe the game day 8 and offensive line are the 5 starters. Orlando Brown, Cordell Volson, Ted Karras, Alex Kappa, and then Trent Brown / Amarius Mims. Let's just say Trent Brown for simplicity's sake. And then your 3 backups, perhaps Cody Ford to back up guards and a tackle if needed. He would be your 4-position backup. Mims, a tackle backup. And Matt Lee, a center-only backup. That's what makes it a little bit murkier, is because last year, in the last few years, they've had backup interior linemen that are center guard flex. And this year, if it is Matt Lee who ends up winning that job instead of Trey Hill, and we'll see how that shakes out, Matt Lee is very much, we think, a center-only player. And so that's what makes it a little bit more dicey this year, I guess, is finding those pieces to back up multiple spots, which is what this team really likes in backups. But perhaps the most salient point when you talk about, well, the Bengals add a depth offensive lineman piece is this team has consistently done one thing with its offensive line, which is really like their own guys to their own detriment. And they eventually learned that lesson, and they went out and they remade the offensive line a couple of years ago after the Super Bowl. But even after doing that, there's always been this kind of blind spot to 1 or 2 guys in the room, or more in some cases, where they just like their own guys that they know that do things the way they want them to be done and all this stuff. And they haven't made that extra move on offensive line. Have they done enough this year? Well, we'll find out if Trent Brown and Cody Ford are the veterans that they needed to add and retain in the last couple of years here to have suitable depth there. But you only have 8 guys up, and maybe those 8 guys that I talked about are something they feel comfortable with. It's just when you start to deal with injuries and you need to get the next guy up, the Jackson Kirklands or the Trey Hills or the Jackson Carmens, where if they had an established veteran there, we're probably all feeling better. But probably a lot of teams feel like that in the NFL.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned him. How wild is it that Jackson Carman wasn't the first Jackson mentioned?
Yeah.
Think about, like, I'm looking at the depth chart here and I'm just like, oh my gosh. Like, so that is a big, as we do our training camp preview, Jackson Carman, Deontay Smith, those guys are really fighting for a roster spot. And you just did the game day 8. And I think that's pretty realistic. And so if you're Carmen, if you're Smith, if you're some of these guys, it's an uphill climb, and we'll see if they respond the right way.
Yeah. On the topic of the offensive line, do you think that, according to Malachi Hayes' question here, Trent Brown at right guard with Amarius Mims at right tackle is a legitimate possibility? Would Alex Kappa move to left guard to try to get the best 5 on the field in the case that Amarius Mims is just ready to go at right tackle and Trent Brown can play right guard? Do you think that's a realistic possibility?
I think if they got into a pinch, Trent could certainly do that. I don't think that they view it that way. I don't think they view Mims that way either. I know that was talked about some. And I do wonder, like, how willing would they be? Because you could easily make, like, what if Mims just kind of hits the ground running here? And you're like, all right, well, we should try to get Trent Brown on the field too. Like, it's a huge. Can you imagine Trent Brown lining up next to Orlando Brown Jr.? Or,
Not really.
I mean, I
so
can't
comical. It's so outlandish.
It's wild. I will say this. I think of all these guys, I'm pretty bullish on Kappa. I think he's going to bounce back in a big way this year. Obviously, we know Ted Karras is the stabilizer. Orlando Brown Jr. Going to bounce back as well. Are we sure that Cordell Volson doesn't take another half step from what he was at the end of last year? Because if so, and I think that's what the Bengals are kind of expecting, then this is really not a combo anyway. And I think the thing we do have to be careful with is they signed Trent Brown to be a tackle, and we want Joe Burrow to be upright. And when you start playing now, if Cordell comes in and he's awful or there's an injury, things could go, hey, you just never know. And maybe, by the way, maybe Trent Brown would be the 6th lineman where, he's starting, but if an injury happens at left guard or right, maybe he goes in. I just think that that's pretty unlikely.
When's the last time Trent Brown played guard?
I don't know. And do you want to do that with your first rounder with Mims, for example? I don't know if I want to yank his chain.
I mean, is Mims going to get any run at guard? I feel like I'd be surprised if we even see
Would
Mims
you
practice.
Would you? I would rather him just practice at tackle. Me personally.
Would I even want to do that? I don't know. I don't even know.
It's tough because you don't want him to his mind to start racing or him to start. Not that he would doubt himself. I think he could do it. But it's not about could. It's about where's he going to be best.
Yeah.
And you're hoping you drafted him to hopefully be your Whitworth of this generation.
I think there's still a competition at right tackle, at least in the early part of camp, unless Trent Brown just comes in and is in better shape and is just ready to go right away. He missed the offseason program, of course, with family health stuff going on. Not that I hold that against him, but he's just going to be a little bit behind where he could be if he had been there. So I think there's still a little bit of a competition there. On Cordell Volson, you asked, are we sure he doesn't take another half step? I wouldn't say we're sure. And I think that a lot of our commenters call me a Cordell Volson hater, and I'm somewhat notorious for that among some. But the path is still potentially there for him to be a Clint Bowling player. It's still, the door is still open. He had 3 real stinkers to open the season last year, which really color our perspective on Cordell Volson. But you mentioned how he finished the season. He was much better at the end of the season than the start of the season, including a stretch of games where he was average to good in every game. And if you're average to good more often than you're bad, then you can get to the Clint Bowling career level. You start getting more consistent. And if he turns into Clint Bowling, I think we're all pretty pleased with that outcome.
Yeah, I think he checks all the boxes you're looking for from an intangible standpoint. Physically, I think he's got the power and the strength and all of those things.
It's just the change of direction ability. It's the constant question.
Frank Pollock talks about it. Yeah, the foot speed. Get those feet moving. And so can he get it moving a little bit more? And if so, Cordell's someone that could be really, really good. So we'll see. Hopefully he does take a step because it would be huge. Could you imagine if he took a step, Orlando Brown Jr. Bounced back after the groin last year, and then Alex Kappa, which I think Brown and Kappa reasonable to expect this to bounce back after what they did last year, which is just kind of uneven. And then you have Trent Brown, who should be an upgrade for this offense. Or if Amarius Mims beats him out, well, then that's a good problem to have as well.
It's that time of year where we like to look for the best case scenario for the Bengals offensive line. Happens every year around this time, doesn't it?
Isn't it realistic? Like the veteran part of
we
that.
We talk ourselves into this every single year. I'm just saying.
All right. Let's I want to respond to that, and I will coming up next. We do talk ourselves into it, Jake. We do. But let's go negative then, real quick. And this is going off script and not getting to mailbag questions, but let's do that.
All I can think of right now is that Arrested Development meme. But this time it could work.
But why? Like Orlando Brown Jr. is a 4-time Pro Bowler, so it should work there.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying we're wrong. I'm just saying it's funny that we talk ourselves into it every year.
Kappa is a proven veteran that was good at times last year, especially going into the bye. He was playing his best ball, I think, and it was uneven for whatever reason. Trent Brown should be better in this offense than Jonah Williams. But let's just say, all right, negative. Trent Brown gets nicked up in camp. Mims goes out there and is just not ready yet. Okay, well, is it going to be much worse than Jonah was in those drop back situations? I don't know. I think Mims is built for that. So part of it is just the physical gifts that Mims and Brown have bring me some hope, combined with the veterans like Brown and Kappa, who I assume are going to play at least average ball for what we expect of them, which would be better or more consistent at least than they were last year.
Yeah, I think the issue for this offensive line, as it is with many offensive lines in the NFL, is consistency. Last year, they were remarkably healthy. I know that Orlando Brown was playing through injury, but they got over 1,000 snaps, over 1,050 snaps from every single offensive lineman. So if they can run that back and have a good string of health and maybe not have to deal with playing through as many injuries and just be a little bit more consistent, not have Cordell Volson's 3 games at the start of the year, not have Orlando Brown's 3 games in the middle of the year, not have Alex Kappa's unevenness, well, then they're a much better unit. And so that would obviously be a boon to this team. Couple more questions I want to get to here in this mailbag, James. The next one is from Bullet Smasher. Who has the better chance of winning their respective awards? Jamar Chase for Offensive Player of the Year or Joe Burrow for MVP? Fun fact, over on FanDuel Sportsbook, they've got the odds for these awards. Joe Burrow for MVP is currently in a tie with CJ Stroud, who is a little bit surprising for me to see here, at third in the NFL regular season MVP odds, behind Patrick Mahomes at plus 500, Josh Allen at plus 800, and Stroud and Burrow tied at plus 1,000. The next couple on the list, just in case you're curious, Lamar Jackson plus 1,400, Jordan Love plus 1,400. For Offensive Player of the Year, Jamar Chase also tied for third. Tyreek Hill plus 800, Christian McCaffrey plus 900, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, and Justin Jefferson all at plus 1,000.
I think that's why Joe Burrow was asked if he feels like he's being slept on a bit. I know CJ Stroud was awesome last year. You putting Stroud ahead of Burrow?
And Lamar Jackson, not to be like a Ravens thing about this or Lamar Jackson about it. Obviously, I agree with you. But like, didn't Lamar just win another MVP?
Yeah. And if they're really good this year after all their losses, it's going to be because of Lamar.
Yeah.
Like if the Bengals do everything that we think they can do, right? Win the division, win 12 plus games. Burrow's going to be a big reason why. Right? So
sometimes odds are weird is all I'm saying.
No doubt. In the injury part is baked in some for sure.
Yeah.
Right. The Stroud one surprises me some, but they're like they're really good, but they're the off-season team, the off-season darling, whatever. I would say this though. It's is Joe in the Offensive Player of the Year odds? Is he there?
No, they're only non-quarterbacks as far as I can see. Running backs and wide receivers all the way down the list. Oh, Josh Allen actually shows up eventually. So he's
because
the first quarterback, and then way down at plus 5,000. Yeah, quarterbacks: Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Anthony Richardson, all at plus 5,000. Lamar Jackson.
All right, so basically they're treating offensive player of the year, which I guess makes sense, as non-quarterbacks MVP, and then MVP is just quarterbacks, which
offensive,
is
fine. But
yeah, for sure. But guess what? All those offensive players would be ahead of most of the defense, most of them. I would bet on, of the two, I would probably say MVP with Burrow, because if Jamar has offensive, like, is putting up huge numbers, then Burrow's numbers are going to be insane. The Bengals are going to be really good, and you mix all that together. Burrow's one of the biggest stars in the game, so he's got the star power too. I mean, it's pretty easy to see him being one of the MVP favorites midway through the year or beyond.
I'm also on the MVP more likely than offensive player of the year. My reasoning may be a little bit different. I just think that it's harder to win offensive player of the year for Jamar Chase. He's on a team that still has T. Higgins.
Harder. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, because of the way the Bengals offense tends to run. Like, he's not gonna. I mean, I guess he could. I shouldn't say he's not going to, but the track record for these crazy huge years for CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, Christian McCaffrey is there. Like, those are the guys that are pushing 2,000 receiving yards or thousands of all-purpose yards and all these touchdowns that Christian McCaffrey racks up as an offensive player of the year candidate. Jamar has shown that he can do it, and part of this is health for sure, and what this team has gone through the last couple of years, including Jamar having his own injuries. But those players are more the engine of their offense, I think, in some ways, than Jamar is the engine of the Bengals offense. Not that Jamar is not an engine of the Bengals offense, but as long as T is also there, I think there's that big split production between the two of those guys.
I think to a degree
diminishes Jamar's chances compared to like a CeeDee Lamb or Justin Jefferson, who are the entire offense for those teams.
Jordan Addison.
Yeah, I mean, sorta.
Is it?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a big difference there.
I don't, because it's not like T's had a 100 catch season or a 90 catch season. Jamar, you're expecting him to have 100 plus catches. It's similar. I mean, now the Cowboys for sure. They may be calling you to play receiver if Brandon Cooks gets nicked up. I mean, they're in a rough spot with CeeDee Lamb and no one else. I mean, I like Cooks, but he's older. He's getting up there. But I mean, look, I just think that Chase, this should be a year where he does much. He exceeds his rookie year production. We're talking 1,500 plus yards. And regardless of T, because this offense shouldn't hold him back from the explosive plays again. He should average 14 or 15 yards per catch again. It shouldn't be 11 or 12. It's got to be higher. That volume can stay high, but the explosiveness needs to be there in this offense. And I think that's the goal. And so even if he drops to 95 catches, I think the yards should be.
I think it's just hard to win offensive player of the year.
It is. No doubt. It is.
There were three receivers in the NFL last year, over 1,780 receiving yards. Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Four, including
two of those three probably won't. Two of those three probably won't hit that mark again. It's
probably
really hard.
Not. It's hard. That's why there's only one guy that wins these awards. And the Bengals have two guys that are tied for third in their respective odds to do it. Last question real quick, because this ties into our last conversation. Noah Klein, what stat is most important for the Bengals this season, not including wins? And this ties right into it. For me, it's explosive plays on both sides of the ball. And that's where, if Jamar is popping off a bunch of explosive plays and isn't forced to be this underneath weapon this year, I think that is a good barometer for this team. If they have figured out how to contain the explosive play more consistently on defense and have figured out how to get back to being more explosive on offense, that is a big indicator to me that this team will be going the right direction this year.
Plays, they're game changers. And whether it's on defense, which you would take a lot of them, right? Maybe this is going to just be the opportunistic defense that forces a bunch of turnovers. I would take that all day long. On offense, they have to be more explosive. It can't be every scoring drive is 12 plays. There's got to be some 2-3 play, some long runs, some big runs. That's a big key to it. And then obviously getting Jamar free downfield, or Mike Gesicki, or T. Higgins, or Jermaine Burton, or you get the point. So yeah, they have to be more explosive. I agree with you.
Yeah, finding a way to unlock the explosive play on offense more consistently than they did last year. It's not like we didn't see it at all, but we need to see that more consistently in a league that, by and large, just wants to take away the explosive play. That's an area where I think we're both looking for the Bengals to be better, and the Bengals are also looking to be better in 2024. We're back to 5 episodes a week next week, James, getting ready for training camp previews, off-season reviews, all things you need to get ready for the return to football. The Bengals will be back in just over a week and a half, I guess, reporting for training camp in the July 23rd, July 22nd area. I don't remember the exact date, so I'm being a little bit more general about it. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.